All hell breaks loose during a biker run in Laughlin, Nevada. Dozens of Hell's Angels swarm Harrah's casino where the Mongols are staying.
The Hell's Angels carved their legacy out of chaos, fear, and sheer dominance. But their greatest battles were never won for long. Every time they crushed one rival, another, even more ruthless enemy came swinging for the throne. The cycle never ends, and each war cuts deeper than the last. This isn't just a story of violence, it's survival, betrayal, and enemies that refuse to stay buried. These are the most dangerous enemies the Hell's Angels have ever faced. Let's get into it. Number 6. The Red Light Area War.
Hamburg is in shock after 8 people died in a mass shooting.
Hamburg's red light district, the Keys, has always been loud, messy, and packed with money. But in late 2015, it became something way more dangerous. The Reeperbahn, the busiest street in the area, suddenly turned into a battlefield.
This is not a common sight in Germany. Police officials rushing through the streets, carrying wounded people to safety.
That winter, the Mongols Motorcycle Club, founded years earlier in California, marched straight into territory the Hells Angels had controlled for ages. They weren't trying to blend in. They walked the streets in full club colors, showed up at Christmas markets, and made sure their jackets were noticed. Reporters wrote about it, cops kept an eye on it, and everyone knew this wasn't casual. It was a direct show of power. The tension exploded when a Facebook video started making the rounds. It showed someone walking through the Kias in a stolen Mongol's jacket, mocking them. Nobody cared who the person was. The insult was what mattered. German tabloids reported the jacket belonged to Mongol's boss, Erkan Uzun, and the whole thing became a huge embarrassment. It was like throwing a match into a room full of gasoline fumes. Trouble was guaranteed. The violence came right after Christmas. 3 Mongols grabbed a taxi near the Reeperbahn. A group tied to the Hells Angels chased them down, and then bullets started flying. At least 7 shots tore into the cab. 1 Mongol was hit in the back, another got grazed, and the driver, who had nothing to do with the feud, panicked and sped off but survived. Police flooded the area, rounded up about a dozen suspected angels, and seized cars, but the actual gunman got away.
And then they gave the information that they believe that the attacker is not on the run. There's of course
pictures of the taxi full of bullet holes hit the front pages everywhere. The whole city could see this wasn't just posturing anymore. Hamburg's nightlife district was at war, but the roots of it stretched back months earlier. That fall, long before the taxi shooting, reporters had spotted Mongols, and sometimes even the banditos, driving through St. Pauli in flashy cars and wearing their gear. It was an open taunt on Hells Angels turf. Police could feel things heating up, so they launched a special task force called Soko Rocker to try to contain it. But the task force couldn't stop what came next.
It is still way too early to say what the possible motivation might have been. Authorities are treating this very carefully.
In December 2015, cops searched Uzun and found a Tanfoglio semi-automatic pistol. Not long after, a grenade exploded under his Lamborghini. Uzun lived, but the message was brutal. No one was untouchable. By the middle of 2016, he was already behind bars. With Uzun gone, the Mongols tried to keep their image alive. A younger member, identified only as Kevin S. in court, began showing up in public in full colors. It was all about appearances, but police raids and rival threats kept hitting them. Then came a turning point. In June 2016, a masked gunman stormed a house on Vilaweg in Schnelsen and opened fire on Mongols vice boss Arash R. and his partner, Lisa Melina S. She was shot several times and barely survived while he was badly injured. Investigators later said that attack was the moment everything changed. It sparked the revenge plan that would erupt 2 years later. That revenge showed up in August 2018. At Millerntorplatz in St. Pauli, a white Bentley stopped at a traffic light. Another car pulled up alongside, and a passenger opened fire. Inside was Dariusz F., one of Hamburg's leading Hells Angels. He survived, but the attack left him paralyzed. Prosecutors said the shooting was organized by Arash R. from inside prison as payback. In 2020, he was sentenced to life, and courts convicted several accomplices. Even in recent years, other people tied to the attack have still been facing trials and sentences. What looked like random street violence was actually part of the same cycle of revenge that had started with the Christmas taxi ambush. So what happened to the Mongols after all this bloodshed? They didn't last. German outlets reported the Hamburg chapter was officially dissolved in early 2016. In other cities, the same thing happened. The Bremen branch folded that same year. On the streets, the group's presence disappeared. Their name kept coming up in courtrooms, but the power play that started on the Reeperbahn collapsed under arrests, raids, and shattered leadership. In the end, the Keys has always been about control. Who runs the doors? Who controls the clubs? Who takes the money that never stops flowing through a street that doesn't sleep? The Mongols tried to take that control by showing up bold and loud. The Hells Angels fired back with bullets and intimidation.
Their territorial dominance to the Mongols, right? That was something that they just could not forget or live down.
Number 5. The River Run Riot. On April 27, 2002, just after 2 in the morning, Harrah's Laughlin Casino, about 100 miles south of Las Vegas, became the center of a war. That weekend was the Laughlin River Run, a spring rally that pulled in tens of thousands of bikers from all over, and tensions had been simmering from the moment the event kicked off.
This is the 20th annual River Run, and normally it's a peaceful event.
The Hells Angels set up base at the Flamingo Hilton, which today is the Aquarius, while the Mongols filled up Harrah's. By the early hours, the two groups couldn't avoid crossing paths, and when they did, the casino floor turned into a battleground. Security cameras caught the moment it all broke loose. Sonoma County Hells Angel Raymond Ray Folks stepped up and kicked a Mongol in the chest. Instantly, chaos ripped through the casino. Guns, knives, hammers, even wrenches came out. Slot machines became barricades, gamblers crawled under chairs, dealers ducked beneath their tables, and the entire room echoed with shouting and gunfire. By the time the sun came up, 3 bikers were dead. More than a dozen were injured, and police had locked down the entire town. The wreckage left behind was unreal. Police counted 14 guns, 107 knives, and 17 other weapons scattered across the floor, including the hammers and wrenches people had grabbed in desperation. These weren't numbers someone made up later. They came straight from the official reports.
We have 16 victims identified, 3 of which are confirmed fatalities.
Prosecutors detailed who was hit. Richard Nolan and Enrique Munoz were shot. Benjamin Benji Leyva was also shot, and others like Davy Camargo and Mel Ramirez were wounded. Raymond Santos and Mongols leader Roger Pinney were stabbed. All of this was confirmed through federal documents and matched against the casino's own time code. The deaths were grim. Mongols member Anthony Salvador Bronson Barrera, age 43, died from a stab wound. 2 Hells Angels, Jeremy Dean Bell, 27, and Robert Emmett Tumulty, 50, were both shot dead. These identities and causes of death came directly from the coroner and were reported by major outlets like the Los Angeles Times. Even in the middle of the madness, investigators noticed something that stood out. The Hells Angels mostly kept their vests on. The Mongols, on the other hand, ditched theirs in trash cans and air vents, trying to slip out without being recognized. When cops started pulling patched vests out of vents and garbage bins, the story told itself. When the indictments rolled in, the details became even clearer. Hells Angel Calvin Schaefer admitted to firing a gun and hitting Richard Nolan. Maurice Pete Eunice admitted to shooting Enrique Munoz. James Hannigan admitted to stabbing Roger Pinney and then stabbing Benjamin Leyva. Rodney Cox admitted to smashing a Mongol in the head with a crescent wrench, and Folks himself admitted to the kick that started it all. The fight wasn't random. It had been brewing for years. The feud came down to territory and the California patch line on the back of their vests. By 2002, the Mongols had spread widely across Southern California with dozens of chapters, far more than the Hells Angels in that region. Both sides showed up to Laughlin ready for a showdown. The U.S. Attorney's Office said the rally that weekend had more than 60,000 attendees, while other outlets pushed that number closer to 80,000. No matter what, the place was packed, and Harrah's casino floor was the boiling point. Law enforcement didn't waste time. Investigators combed through hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. Within a year, a federal grand jury in Las Vegas indicted 42 Hells Angels on racketeering and violent crime charges tied to the brawl. By 2005, prosecutors hit harder with a superseding indictment, raising the number of defendants to 44. The trials dragged on for years, and the results were complicated. Some of the biggest federal charges collapsed in court, but not everyone walked. 6 Hells Angels ended up serving sentences ranging from 21 to 51 months on violent crime charges. Calvin Schaefer received the longest at 51 months. On the Mongols' side, 6 members were sentenced as well. Alexander Alcantar pled guilty to 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter for the killings of Bell and Tumulty. He was sentenced to between 18 and 45 months. The violence didn't stop at the casino. Hours after the fight, Hells Angel Christian Harvey Tate, 29 years old, was riding westbound on Interstate 40 near Ludlow, California, when he was shot dead. San Bernardino County investigators still list it as a cold case, but say it almost certainly ties back to Laughlin. The fallout stretched beyond gang circles. Harrah's itself got dragged into court. Bystanders who were trapped during the fight sued the casino for lack of security. In 2010, a Clark County jury found Harrah's liable in one case, and several other lawsuits from bystanders were quietly settled. That wasn't a bar fight, that was open war, but this didn't start in Nevada. Number 4, the Outlaws. In the late 1970s, Quebec turned into the stage for what would later be known as Canada's first biker war. Two of the biggest outlaw motorcycle clubs from the United States wanted to push north, and neither side planned on backing down. The Outlaws struck first. On July 1st, 1977, they expanded into Canada by absorbing several Satan's Choice chapters in Ontario. Just a few months later, on December 5th, 1977, the Hells Angels made their own Canadian debut at a wild party in Laval, just outside Montreal. That night, the Popeyes, one of Montreal's toughest local gangs, patched over and officially became Hells Angels. From that moment, the fight for Quebec was on. Both groups were after the same things: control of drug sales, bars, and protection rackets in Montreal. By the start of 1978, the violence was already spilling out into the open. On March 21st, Gilles Carteret, president of the Outlaws Montreal chapter, was blown up by a car bomb outside a bar on Bordeaux Street. Police and reporters at the time tied it directly to the feud with the Angels. Barely a month later, on April 25th, Hells Angel Denis Le Curé Kennedy and another Angel stormed the Outlaws clubhouse on Rue Saint-Ferdinand and opened fire. No one died that night, but several people were wounded. Then, only 2 days later, Kennedy struck again, shooting outlaw François Policeno and his girlfriend, Suzanne Harvey, while they sat in a bar. Ballistics later proved it was the same weapon used at the clubhouse. These back-to-back attacks sent a clear message. The violence wasn't slowing, it was escalating. The Angels also relied on one of their most dangerous men, Yves Apache Trudeau. He wasn't loud, but he was an expert in bombs and close-range killings. Trudeau was linked to the March car bombing that killed Carteret, and on November 10, 1978, he walked up to the home of Brian Powers, a former Outlaws leader, knocked on the door, and shot him dead in Sainte-Geneviève. Years later, when Trudeau flipped and started talking to police, he admitted to killing 43 people in total. Of those, 18 were outlaws he personally eliminated during the war. That number alone shows just how deadly this conflict really was. One of the bloodiest moments came on October 12, 1978. Two American outlaws walked into a biker party at Le Tourbillon, a Montreal bar, and opened fire with a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. Hells Angel Jean Brochu was killed on the spot. Two other Angels, Louis Tiwi Lapierre and Bruno Coulombe, were badly wounded. Two members of the Wild Ones, a smaller crew allied with the Angels, were also killed: George Chico Mousseau and Gary Gator Davies. Walter Stadnick, who later rose to become one of the most powerful Hells Angels in Canada, only survived by diving under a table. The Angels traced the ambush back to Outlaws figure Roland Roxy Dutemple, and not long after, Trudeau retaliated by blowing up Dutemple's car. That party shooting became one of the defining moments of the war. From there, the fighting spilled into Ontario. The Outlaws targeted the Wild Ones because of their ties to the Angels. Several Wild Ones were murdered, including 2 killed by car bombs. The group eventually collapsed under the pressure. Even the Angels' top leadership wasn't untouchable. On September 8, 1983, Yves Lebas Buteau, the national president of the Angels in Canada, walked out of Le Petit Bourg restaurant in Longueuil, alongside a former Satan's Choice member who was considering switching sides. A young Outlaws associate named Gino Goudreau pulled out a revolver and opened fire. Buteau and the visitor were killed, and another Angel was wounded. It was a devastating loss for the Angels, but it didn't stop their advance. Michel Sky Langlois quickly stepped in and took over as national president. By the end of 1980, police estimated there had already been 20 to 30 murders tied to the conflict in Quebec and Ontario. Between 1981 and 1984, they recorded another 42 killings linked to the war. The Outlaws kept losing ground in Montreal. In March of 1984, a bomb killed Bernard Savoy, the brother and right-hand man of the Outlaws' Montreal boss, Daniel Savoy. Just 2 months later, gunmen on motorcycles rode up alongside Daniel Savoy and fellow outlaw John Gallipo and shot them dead while they were on the road. By the end of that year, the Outlaws' presence in Montreal had been destroyed. They pulled back to Ontario, leaving Quebec in the hands of the Hells Angels. That is how the first biker war ended. The Angels won Quebec, but the city wasn't done bleeding. Number 3. The Rock Machine. Montreal didn't just have a biker problem in the 90s, it had a war. From 1994 until 2002, the streets of Quebec were locked in the deadliest biker conflict the world has ever seen. On one side, the Hells Angels, who already had a powerful grip on Canada. On the other, the Rock Machine, a stubborn crew that refused to bow down. When it was over, about 162 people were dead. More than 80 bombs had gone off, and around 130 fires had been set. The Rock Machine's story began back in 1986 when Salvatore Cazzetta and his brother Giovanni decided to build their own club in Montreal. They wanted to stay independent, not under the Angels' thumb. But everything changed in May of 1994 when Salvatore was arrested in a massive drug case. He was caught in a plan to move 11 tons of cocaine. That's roughly 22,000 pounds. He ended up extradited to Florida and pled guilty in 1999. With him off the streets, the Angels saw an opening. Their Quebec boss, Maurice "Mom" Boucher, pushed hard to take over drug sales, and that's what lit the fuse for the war. The first killing tied to the conflict came on July 13, 1994. Pierre Daoust, linked to an Angels support club, was shot and killed. The very next day, cops grabbed 5 Rock Machine members while they were prepping another hit. From there, violence spread like wildfire. Bombs tore through bars, cars, and clubhouses. Fires were set across the city. For regular Montrealers, it felt like a battlefield had opened in their neighborhoods. The single moment that shook the whole city came on August 9, 1995. A bomb meant to scare or kill a dealer exploded near a school in Hochelaga Maisonneuve. 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers was outside when shrapnel hit him. He died 5 days later. Police later tied that blast to Hells Angels operators, and the boy's death became the heartbreaking symbol of how far things had gone. By the late 90s, Boucher was running the Hells Angels Nomads chapter in Quebec, their most elite crew. He had farm teams like the Rockers carrying out hits and moving drugs for him. But he didn't stop at controlling the streets. He went straight after the justice system. On June 26, 1997, Correctional Officer Diane Levine was murdered in an ambush. On September 8th, that same year, another officer, Pierre Rondeau, was killed. These weren't random murders, they were planned attacks to scare cops and shut down informants. The truth came out when a Hells Angels hitman, Stéphane Gagné, flipped and testified. At first, Boucher walked free in 1998, but an appeal overturned it. In May 2002, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 attempted murder. He was sentenced to life behind bars. At the same time, the Angels world was being exposed from the inside. An associate named Danny Kane was tied to the Rockers, but secretly fed intel to the RCMP almost daily. He gave police a detailed map of the Angels network. He was no saint. He still committed crimes while informing, but his reports helped shape police strategy throughout the war. Kane was found dead in 2000 in what police called a suicide, but his files remained some of the most valuable insights into the biker underworld. The Rock Machine knew they couldn't survive alone, so they tried to build strength. They formed the Alliance, pulling in independent dealers and smaller crews. Then they looked abroad. In December 2000, they became probationary members of the Bandidos, and by December 1, 2001, most of their Quebec and Ontario chapters fully patched over. It wasn't just a new jacket. It was a declaration that they had backing from one of the biggest international rivals to the Hells Angels. But not everyone stuck with them. Some, like Paul Porter, switched to the Angels instead, trading their Rock Machine patch for an Angels patch in exchange for rank and influence. Police weren't sitting on the sidelines either. On March 28, 2001, Quebec police launched Operation Printemps 2001, Operation Springtime. It was one of the biggest biker crackdowns in Canadian history. About 2,000 officers carried out 280 searches across 77 cities. 138 people tied to the Angels and their puppet clubs were arrested in a single day. Later sweeps, like Operation Amigo, piled on even more arrests. The raids gutted both groups and drained their ability to keep the war going. By 2002, the combination of the Rock Machine patching over to the Bandidos, mass arrests from police, and the life sentence handed down to Boucher finally slowed the bloodshed. But the damage had already been done, and the fight didn't stay in Canada. It went global. Number 2. The Bandidos. The Bandidos story begins in San Leon, Texas in 1966. Donald Mother Chambers, a Marine and Vietnam veteran, started the club with a handful of guys he knew from biker bars around Houston. These weren't hobby riders. They were men who lived hard, many of them carrying the scars of war. By the early 70s, the Bandidos had more than 100 members, most of them Vietnam vets, and they wore the 1% outlaw patch with pride. Law enforcement took notice quickly, and court files confirm that from the very start, this wasn't a casual riding club. It was a serious outlaw organization. The growth was fast. The Bandidos spread across Texas, then into other states, and before long, they set their sights overseas.
We know we can't live like that anymore. Most of us are all businessmen or have jobs.
By 1992, they had probationary chapters in Denmark, and in 1994, they absorbed a Danish club that already had beef with the Hells Angels. That one move dropped them right onto Hells Angels turf and kicked off what became known as the Nordic Biker War. From 1994 to 1997, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland were hit with car bombs, shootings, and even military-grade weapons being used on city streets. The moment that shocked Europe came on March 10, 1996. Outside Copenhagen's Kastrup airport, 4 bandidos were ambushed by Hells Angels in broad daylight. Gunfire ripped through the group. Uffe Lindenskov Larsen, a bandito, was killed, and 3 others were badly wounded. Within an hour, a similar ambush went down outside Oslo's airport in Norway. These weren't drunken bar fights. This was organized warfare, happening in public places where bystanders could have easily been caught in the crossfire. The bandidos hit back with something that stunned the world. On October 6, 1996, a shoulder-fired rocket was launched into the Hells Angels clubhouse on Titengade Street in Copenhagen during a packed party. 2 people died that night: Louis Nielsen, a Hells Angels prospect, and Jana Krohn, a guest who had nothing to do with bikers. 17 to 19 others were wounded. A Bandidos prospect named Niels Poulsen was later convicted for the attack. People who lived through it still describe the horror of seeing a rocket blast tear through a neighborhood in the middle of the night. That wasn't the only act of extreme violence. The Nordic War saw machine gun ambushes, grenades, and car bombs. By mid-1997, dozens had been killed or wounded, and governments were panicking. Danish officials were openly pushing for cross-border policing because the violence was spreading across Scandinavia like wildfire. The rivalry soon expanded into Germany. By the 2000s, cities like Berlin and Cottbus were seeing open shootouts in the streets. Police made dozens of arrests, and German officials even debated outlawing both clubs entirely. In May of 2010, after a particularly bloody stretch, leaders from the Bandidos and Hells Angels met in Hanover, shook hands for the cameras, and announced a truce. But it didn't last. Within weeks, new shootings hit the headlines. That short-lived peace showed just how bad the situation had gotten, and how little faith anyone had that the violence would truly stop. Australia also became a hot zone.
Law enforcement knows the Bandidos are behind the hit, but they can't prove it.
In 2011, a Sydney biker boss named Felix Lyle convinced around 50 to 60 Bandidos to switch sides and join the Hells Angels. Reports claimed millions of dollars changed hands to make it happen. That move gutted a major Bandidos chapter in Parramatta and lit another wave of violence. It proved once again that the feud between the two clubs wasn't just an American or European problem. It was worldwide. Meanwhile, back home in Texas, the Bandidos kept drawing the eye of federal investigators. Alongside the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, and the Pagans, they were counted as part of the Big Four outlaw motorcycle clubs, meaning the most dangerous and most organized. In January of 2016, the Department of Justice unsealed a massive racketeering case against the Bandidos' top leaders. In 2018, a San Antonio jury found National President Jeffrey Fay Pike and National Vice President John Portillo guilty on 13 counts that included racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and drug trafficking. The sentences were heavy. Pike got life plus 10 years. Portillo got 2 consecutive life sentences plus 20 more years. Prosecutors tied them to years of violent attacks and drug operations, all meant to protect the club's power and territory. And even now, the Bandidos haven't faded. In 2024, Houston prosecutors filed new charges laying out violent acts they say were carried out to hold territory. The descriptions sound just like they did decades ago: intimidation, violence, and organized hits. The pattern hasn't changed. When it comes to size, the estimates vary, but law enforcement and academic sources often put the club at around 300 chapters spread across about 22 countries, with a couple thousand members worldwide. That reach keeps them in the same league as the Hells Angels, Outlaws, and Pagans. From a handful of Houston bikers in 1966 to a global outlaw empire, the Bandidos have left their mark everywhere they've gone. Number 1. Satudara MCA. Duisburg, a gritty city in Germany's industrial heartland, became one of the country's deadliest biker battlegrounds. Right after Berlin, it was the hotspot where the Hells Angels clashed head-on with Satudara MC. Satudara wasn't some small crew that just appeared out of nowhere. They started back in 1990 in Moordrecht, Netherlands, founded by 9 friends of mostly Moluccan descent, with roots going back to Indonesia's Maluku Islands. The word Satudara literally means one blood, and from the start they promoted themselves as a multi-ethnic club. Their black and gold colors and warrior logo were bold, and their name spread fast. By 2012, they had set their sights on Germany, and Duisburg quickly turned into the main flashpoint. Police already saw the city as a ticking time bomb, with too many rival groups circling each other. Then it exploded in ways nobody thought possible in a German city. In August 2012, someone tossed an M75 hand grenade into a Hells Angels clubhouse in the Rumeln-Kaldenhausen district. Not long after, a gunman sprayed 13 bullets from a Scorpion machine pistol into the Beaker Cafe, a hangout spot tied to the Angels. Investigators later uncovered text messages bragging about the shooting. This was not about fistfights outside bars anymore. This was heavy weapon warfare on city streets. Running Satudara's Duisburg branch was Yildiray Kaimaz, better known as Ali Osman. He was not just a figurehead. Prosecutors said he and his crew ran serious cross-border drug and gun operations. Police later seized an AK-style rifle with about 1,130 rounds of ammunition, along with 2 Scorpion submachine guns. Investigators also linked the group to about 25 kilograms of marijuana, roughly 55 pounds, and more than 1 kilogram of cocaine, about 2.2 pounds. That kind of money and firepower explained why Satudara could muscle in and challenge the Hells Angels directly. But cops had something the bikers didn't see coming: an insider, a man known only as Christian J., a former French Foreign Legion soldier turned police informant. He was on the payroll as a source and passed along inside info about Satudara's operations. Thanks to his tips, police set up wiretaps, hit stash houses, and pulled together major cases. When he finally stood trial himself for drugs and weapons, judges gave him an incredibly light sentence, just 2 years on probation in 2017, because his testimony was key to tearing down the group from the inside. Even Ali Osman eventually broke. In court during 2014 and 2015, he gave a full confession. That is almost unheard of in biker circles, where silence is a rule. He admitted to major pieces of the operation and was sentenced to 6.5 years for drug and weapons charges. His testimony also revealed why a local crew called Brotherhood Clowntown switched over to Satudara in 2012. They wanted better and cheaper drug supplies through Satudara's Dutch connections. Osman's confession lined up perfectly with what investigators had already recorded on wiretaps, which made the case airtight. The German government knew arrests weren't enough. On February 24, 2015, Germany's Federal Interior Minister officially banned Satudara Maluku MC nationwide. It was the first time the government used a countrywide ban on a biker club. At dawn, police raided clubhouses and homes in at least 5 states, including North Rhine-Westphalia, Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, Lower Saxony, and Bremen. Authorities shut down all operations, seized property, and made it illegal to wear or display Satudara's name or logo. Courts later upheld the ban, locking it in for good. The crackdown didn't stop at Germany's borders. On June 18, 2018, a court in The Hague banned and dissolved Satudara in the Netherlands, along with 2 of its support groups, Support Crew, 999, and Saudara. The ruling was appealed, but on June 18, 2019, the appeals court confirmed the ban. Then on November 13, 2020, the Dutch Supreme Court finalized it. That meant Satudara itself, the entire organization, was illegal in the very country where it was born. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.